Thank you, Danny. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those who already had lunch. I haven't, so neither has Karim, so we are still missing that part of the day. So I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about the energy trilemma in Brazil and what we could learn from other countries. To contextualize a little bit our topic today, I want to bring the three driving forces that are shaping the energy transition, or as we might say, the energy addition that is happening in the world today. First of all, we have climate change. We are already missing the target for 1.5 degrees increase in the planetary temperature, which means that there is real climate impact taking place. We see more droughts, we see more floods, we see the movement of large populations, and so on. The other part is energy demand. Energy demand is growing and will keep growing for the next years, decades, and even centuries. We have now the emergency of AI, which is disrupting all the energy demand that is coming to the world. If you look 5 years back, no one was looking at how this exponential energy demand would come through, and now we are seeing that everyone is planning for that. Furthermore, we have to think about the underdeveloped communities. There is no way for communities to develop themselves without having more energy or access to good and affordable energy. Finally, geopolitics is driving a new context. We are just seeing the ceasefire in the Middle East once again, and still we don't see a huge impact on the oil prices, but we know that the stability is growing. And if you look worldwide, we never have seen so many war zones taking place since World War II. So those driving forces are shaping the way energy transition is taking place from now on. When I go for the specifics for Brazil, there are other three elements that need to be taken into consideration. The first one is resilience. What we see is, although we have a diversified and very good renewable matrix, we have many gaps when it comes down to the stability of our grid, or even the supply chain to take this energy from places where it's produced up to the place where they need to be consumed. Energy infrastructure, the transmission lines, that is a destiny for you to take energy that is produced in the northeast, taking it to the southeast, for instance, and we still have lack on the gas pipelines infrastructure. So if we're looking at taking more gas from the pre-salt, we need to think about this infrastructure to take it from offshore to the ground and then distribute to the countryside. Finally, we need to balance well how energy policy is taking place. And the concept here is we need to balance what is technical needed with what is political possible. So politicians and regulators need to understand what are the main characteristics that our energy system must have to ensure that we address correctly the problems that we see. To take this into a more general framework, and moving away a little bit from what the Energy Summit sponsor MIT deals with, the 4Ds, we are bringing together the energy trilemma from the World Energy Council. The trilemma looks at energy into three different dimensions: energy security, or how I supply reliable, and how can I supply my energy in a reliable way to the current situations up to the future. Also, energy equity. How can I make the energy available for everyone at a reasonable cost and prices? And finally, how this energy can be sustainable, so we move away from emissions that will increase the climate change. If I look at the way Brazil is positioned versus developed countries, we see that we are not so well behind. Okay, if you look at energy security and energy sustainability or environmental sustainability, we are even better than the US and Europe. However, we fall behind when it comes down to energy equity. And the reason behind the energy security and environmental sustainability index being so good is the renewable and diversified matrix that we have. Remember that roughly 46% of our energy matrix comes from renewables. And not only hydro, we are talking about ethanol, biomass, solar, wind, and others. However, since we have differences In the access of this energy to the different segments of the economy, we fell behind on the energy equity. However, when I look at this chart, I always think about a watermelon because it seems to be green from the outside. But once we open it and start looking at the details, we see a red flag. And this is where we're going to drive into the contexts here. If I look at the dimension energy security, even though we have this diversified and renewable matrix, we have many Brazils within Brazil. We have places such as the Northeast, which is a net exporter of energy, with the Southeast being a net importer of energy. So there is a misbalancing there. Right now we are facing curtailment all over because there is no way for you to take this energy from one place to the other. We still see gas playing a major role and will play a role in the coming future in order to stabilize the grid. We see a lot of quality issues in the grid, and we see this related to resilience. If you take São Paulo State, for instance, we have been facing many problems with the local distributor because it starts to rain and all of a sudden there is no light in many places of the city. But if you go for the north regions, the grid is very, very weak. So communities in there have electricity that comes on and out every time. Also, there are other communities that are isolated that rely on diesel to use their generation, to have their energy available. And this increases costs and emission to our grid. And it still is not that reliable. And we think about, okay, there is a lot of ethanol being produced in Brazil. And we have good prices in the Southeast. However, this not corresponds to the same that we see, for instance, in the Northeast, in the South, or in the North. Because the logistics to take this ethanol from the local producers up to those consumption places is hard, is done by trucks, and it costs a lot. When you think about energy equity, we need to think about it beyond the access. What I mean by beyond the access, if you look at the grid, we have a very integrated grid. So much of our population has access to electricity. But it's not only that. We need to think about the other energy sources. We need to address the energy poverty. For instance, 20% of our population still relies on traditional biomass. And for the Portuguese speakers in the audience, we are talking about lenha catada to use for cooking purpose. So we as an LPG company are very worried about this problem. And we are trying to address that as much as we can. The use of traditional biomass, although it might not contribute too much for GHG emissions, it does release fumes and other toxic gases to the local households. So it's a problem of public health. Also, when I look at, I want to increase the quality of life of our population in Brazil. And for that, people need to have access to energy. Right now, we are missing a lot of thermal comfort, refrigeration, digital tools in many communities. So if you want those people to have access to that, energy needs to be available to them. When it comes down to prices, and I look at the energy prices for us in the household here in Brazil, it's quite expensive when I compare it to other places. And the major reason behind it is the hidden cost of the system. And even when I talk about, there is renewables that are available for the population to generate its own power, but we are not talking about the population that needs smaller prices. The ones that have access to that are the ones that actually do not need such smaller prices. So there is this disparity. And when you're trying to plan for the energy systems in Brazil, the involvement of the community that will be impacted by the construction of transmission lines or new power plants or wind farms and so on is not that good. So we plan everything, and then once we go for the permits, we start addressing those problems. And then more issues come to the scene. Finally, even though we have a very good experience with renewables in Brazil, and we have the Proálcool initiative being in place since the 70s, we have hydropower feeding our system since the 70s, we are not entirely sustainable in that aspect, if you look at that. Because we still face a lot of discussions from outside, from foreign countries, telling us that we are not producing biofuels in a sustainable way, because biofuels is taking out Amazon forest to pre-plant cane, soybeans, and so on that will be producing ethanol and biodiesel. So we need to organize this discourse or this way of speaking, so we make sure that in the way that we position our production of energy is indeed sustainable. We need to present that to the world. This is something that requires an alliance from the private sector and the public sector. Also, one thing that we are still missing when it comes down to sustainability is the way we use energy. We talk very little about energy efficiency in Brazil. If you look at how many companies, what we called in the past the energy saving companies, it started very big, maybe in the late 1990s, beginning of the 2000s. But right now, we are missing those because energy was cheap. And it's not that expensive for the industry still. And who is driving the efficiency will be the industry, then we'll go to the local households, not the way around. So how to address this trilemma? And what we did is we looked for what the regulator is telling us. So we went for the 10-year plan from EPE to see what kind of measures are within the plan to check if they are addressing or not. If we start by the energy demand and efficiency, there is an expectation that energy will grow 2.6% per year in the next 10 years. But this number is missing something. What about data centers? If data centers come into the scene, this number can be much higher. Where does this energy will come from? What are the transmission lines are needed for that? The second one is energy poverty remains a priority. So we need to address that. But how are we going to address that, actually? What are the fuels that are going to be used to replace traditional biomass? Are we talking about LPG? How we can make LPG more affordable to population in general? Or what kind of policies need to be in place for us to address that? And energy intensity, as I mentioned, it's expected to have a decrease. So we are expecting to increase the efficiency at which we use energy. But how? Many problems we have with those studies is we are missing the how part. What kind of incentives will be in the economy? What kind of drivers to the industry going to put to actually go after those measures? On the supply infrastructure expansion, we're going to see that renewables will still play a role. It's expected that 50% of all the new additions will come from wind, solar, and maybe a little bit of biomass, which means that the intermittency problem is going to be there. It's going to be a real thing. And curtailment that is happening today is likely to be worse in the future if we do nothing about it. Oil and gas will remain relevant. As I was mentioning in the introduction, we are not talking about energy transition in itself. It's an energy addition. Yesterday in this masterclass was presented a very interesting chart that we saw the evolution of the world energy matrix over the last 100 years or so. Dani, I don't recall, I think it's more or less that. And it starts with traditional biomass being close to 90% of the energy matrix. And when you see the final version, it had the same absolute value that it has today. But you see a pile of other energy sources being part of that. So you see coal, you see oil, gas, and then you have the new renewables. This is quite interesting because if we're talking about energy addition, then we need to look at the whole energy source that I have available to plan for my market. In this regard, oil and gas for Brazil are relevant, and we be a global player in this market still. Finally, we need investments in the transmission lines. This is no news for most of people that are involved in the energy systems or in the energy segment. We need to take the energy in the northeast, bring it to the southeast or even to the south to allow for that flow and avoid curtailment problems and avoid having cheap energy available in one place while expensive energy is being used where it's needed. When you go for technological trends, solar will play a role, but what's important to mention in this chart, the two second topics. We need grid modernization. I'm not talking about only the transmission grid, but we're talking about the distribution grids. More distributed power will come into the scene. So the local grids will need to deal with that. Smart grids are needed for you to work and balance the loads that you have, from generators to consumers and so on. There is even a discussion if curtailment needs to happen for distributed generation, because in the end of the day, centralized generation is facing curtailment, while distributed generation is not. And this poses a cost problem in the system that is not well addressed. Finally, green hydrogen is something that has a long discussions in Brazil. We are a powerhouse for that, and it's likely to be developed somehow. There are still questions on what use is going to have for the green hydrogen. I'm not going that direction, if it's going to be hydrogen to export to somebody else or to be used locally. But the problem is, if we add hydrogen capacity to the grid, it means that we are adding gigawatts of power to it. So again, we are looking at problems in generation and in transmission. Finally, in sustainability and policy integration, we need to expect a decrease in the carbon intensity of the grid. And we are talking about a grid that is already much renewable. So go beyond what we have today. We are already world leaders. So we are moving to be even far, far away from them, from the rest of the world. It's not going to be an easy task. However, for that to happen, what we need to do is to have a closer alignment between the different sectors that are involved. So energy planning needs to talk with climate commitments. As I was mentioning before, we are missing the target. And if you look at how the planning is done and what are the commitments we have for carbon emissions, they are not totally aligned. If you go for the governance around the energy system, it's even a problem. Let's take, for instance, the discussion about the Amazon basin. MME, or the Minister of Energy, is pushing towards developing it, while the Environmental Minister is taking a cautious path, so we can address that and say, look, what are the environmental impacts of that? So how to align all those points? What's important? Because if you look at the countries that are near that basin, they are already doing something. So what's going to be our next steps? So this alignment needs to be in place. So the purpose today is to see, given that what we know from Brazil and what the regulators or the planning is looking ahead, what can be seen from other countries that we could bring to the discussions and see other initiatives? And I have pointed out 4 aspects, and I'll ask Karin to join us to discuss this even further. But the 4 ones are, we need to build resilience beyond hydro. This is a must, okay? In the past, you can think about hydro cycles of 8 years, maybe 10 years. Right now, we see drought cycles that are much closer to each other. So the reliance on hydro means that we have more volatility in prices, and the entrance of new renewables will also require more gas being into the pipeline. So we're going to need to rely on different sources and the way that they build the structure. When I look at what happened outside, European Union, it's easier to say, had a major bump when the Russian-Ukraine war started. They were relying too much on the Russian gas. All of a sudden, there is a war, and how can I heat up the countries without this gas? So they need to rethink their reliance, the resilience of their energy grids. In Australia, they started investing a lot on grid-scale batteries in order to stabilize and allow for more renewables coming to the scene. So what we need to do is we need to bring more resilience to our own grid, to think about the backups that will allow us to have more flexibility, reliability and demand response for the energy needs. When it comes down to affordability, we need to think about how to design good market and tariff structures to allow for the inclusion to help to work well. In India, for instance, they implemented good policies on electricity and LPG. However, South Africa experienced some problems on unsustainable ways of producing those tariffs. So what we need to think about when doing those initiatives is energy poverty is a problem and it needs to be fought. However, the cost of fighting this battle needs to be well balanced and understand what each part of the value chain will add to the fight. Many times we try to fight only one, I'm quoting here, one enemy. We are seeing this in our own sector. Okay? But you need to look at it in a more broad way and see what are the options I have in place and what kind of investments needs to be done and where this money will come from. On sustainability, we need to commit early and deeply with green innovation. So in Germany, we saw that there is a program that combined the long-term view of carbon pricing with subsidies to R&D to find the solutions to integrate the grid. In Chile, they had a view on being a hydrogen powerhouse. So they invested a lot in solar and wind and produced the grid for that. In Brazil, what we need is to have the regulatory signs correct and have a political stability for those points. So investments can flow in and people have a long-term horizon. We are talking about infrastructure. We're not talking about returns of 2 to 3 years. It's more 15 to 20. So we need stability. We need to know how the regulations will work. Finally, governance and planning. We need to enable long-term vision and alignment. So we need all the segments, all the sectors to work together and have a common view on where we want to go to. If we look at what UK created, they have independent bodies that make the governance for the energy system. And they are talking to each other and discussing how the system will work and what's next. Of course, the UK has a different perspective on when it comes to energy increase. It's a very stable energy demand. It's increasing very little year by year, different from Brazil. However, they have this governance. And we have used so much from the energy systems in Brazil, why not take this one as well? In Canada, there is a multi-level energy governance to balance the autonomy of the states, of the provinces, versus what's needed from the country as a whole. So what we need to think about in Brazil is how can we improve the horizontal and vertical coordinations of the different entities that are working in the energy system. We need to think about integrating the energy planning with our goals for sustainability and plan for the future with those goals in mind. Not only thinking about the energy demand and so on. So this is how we see the trilemma taking place. We need to understand how to secure the grid, even the gas and the electricity grid. We need to understand how to make it affordable for the population and using solutions that will not go against climate change, that will happen, that will help fight what we are seeing. What I want to bring to the discussion right now is ask you, the audience, and Karin to help us out, is if we want to build a manifest on how to address the trilemma, how we would do about it. Here are some questions that I want to pose to you. What are the strengths that we have? What challenges do we see? What needs to be built and put in place? What roles the sectors have to play? What alliance can be forged? What's the role of innovation? And other experience that you might have that you want to share. So I invite you all to the debate right now. The masterclass is not only something for me to present to you, but is actually to get something from you too. And I ask Karin to contribute as well.
Yes, thank you, Luis. Well, I feel very humble when I hear this presentation because I don't know the Brazilian situation, but I do have the experience from Europe, and I think what comes to mind when I hear you present all of this is reminds me of the journey. My company is I'm working for a startup developing a energy storage technology. And it reminds me of like we we identified this problem, like how can we decarbonize industries? Because I think in Denmark, so the company is based in Denmark, and Europe in general is deploying a lot of renewables already, and it poses the challenge of modernizing the grid and to avoid grid congestion. And like Germany, for instance, is a bit like Brazil. There's a lot of renewable in the north, but the grid cannot transport that electricity to the south, where there's a lot of consumption of electricity. So going back to the startup journey I was talking about, we wanted to see how can we help the industry decarbonize and capture all this renewable energy. And I think maybe my recommendation for the masterclass is if we could identify a problem that we want to solve and go back to what are the stakeholders we need to align to actually fix that problem. Because very quickly, if we look at a local community somewhere in Brazil that's not connected to the grid and is burning this toxic biomass, how does it look like when we actually deliver clean electricity to this community? What has happened? So if we go back, if we say in 10 years from now, they have access to electricity or natural gas, how have we built the grid? Do we build like a local grid? What kind of solutions are they that we can implement there? And yeah, the role of the private and public sectors, because my experience is really that when we have been looking at industrial decarbonization, well, we thought, well, that's easy. We put a thermal storage plant there and then we charge from the grid, but happens the grid is not necessarily available or there's not enough power coming in. So now we're looking at, okay, now we need to partner with renewable developers and convince them that there's a potential for them, there's a market in deploying renewables for industrial decarbonization, not only for electricity production, but also for industrial heat. So there's always a lot of stakeholders that you need to move on your journey. That's my message, I think. But do you have any like examples of things that you're working on that you would like to share and discuss?
I'd like to hear a little bit about innovation in Europe. And I strongly believe that innovation in this area is very capital intensive. Okay, so you in a startup probably is facing support from investors, from government. I'd like to know about the ecosystem of innovation in this area in Europe.
Yeah, that's a good question. So Heim is still quite early stage. We have built a first demonstrator. So I can go through the value chain of soft funding. So Heim as a company has received private capital. And for our project, for the demonstrator, we have benefited from a national grant from Denmark. And now we are developing our first commercial project, which is a multi-million euro project. And for that, we got the commitment of the industrial partner to invest a certain amount. And we have applied for a large grant from the European Commission. So definitely all this like envelope of soft funding available in Europe, talking about the role of government, is committing some money to help large-scale demonstration and first-of-a-kind commercial projects is key for us.
But if I may add something to your point, if you look at the investments of the Commission, of the European Commission on energy plans or energy initiative with local universities and different entities, there is a lot of being built. So they put the problems and take for the academia, so the academia can think about the problem and solve solutions. And many times industries come together in this funding as well. So if you follow what is happening for heat pumps, there is a lot of investment being done in heat pumps in Europe. And there is industries that are looking for that. There is universities working on that, and from different countries to address the problem. So the integration between public sector, university, and private sector is quite key in this point. because money is available in the private sector. There are venture capitals, early stage funds that are willing to invest in finding new solutions. There is the university that is the birthplace of many of the innovation that we see when it comes down to cutting edge technology. And you have the public sector that needs to build the environment that will support this growth.
Yeah, hi. I am. I would like to give some. I'm from Copa Energy as well. I'm sustainability director, and I'd like to bring two examples that we have of partnerships with two key stakeholders for us. One is obviously the public policy, the policymaker. So we do what we do is our main product is LPG, so it's a key product for clean cooking, for example, and we do access as a distribution company most of the country, or 100% of the country actually, but we do have an issue of price access for low-income families. So what we are doing is we are supporting the policymaker in producing a plan, a subsidy plan focused on low-income population to have access, which is called Gás para Todos. We've been supporting them with data, etc., to give access to these people. And one other stakeholder that is key to us is civil society. So we just had a very small scale, very inspiring, experience recently. We are introducing lighting, public illumination in some, quilombola, which is original communities in the north of Brazil. We've been there like 2 weeks ago. And what we are doing is giving them access to public illumination in partnership with a civil society organization that is local and has the knowledge of bringing, distributed electricity to this population. It was a very beautiful, initiative, very small, but it's part of what we are trying to bring in terms of access. So I think that not only with the policymakers, but also with academia, etc., private sector, and civil society as part of the solution for the access. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very nice stories. I'm curious about the gas for cooking that you were mentioning. Do you have local? Do you have, what would you say, a champion in the local community to drive the project and kind of educate the others to adopt new, because I guess it's very ingrained in how they do things, that they do a certain thing. And so do you have change champions locally?
We don't. That's a very new agenda for us, in the sense that we are proactively pursuing this agenda. The thing is, the number in Brazil is very appalling, in the sense that up to 20% of households in Brazil still use wood for cooking, and Brazil is a very vast country. So there's the number one, initiative has to be education, because this is the kind of issue that has impact in the environment. It has impact on the health of the householders, and it also has a very important gender impact, because women are cooking and with their kids, etc. So this is a very dear agenda for us, and it's something that we understand that has to begin with the education of the potential users, and telling them what kind of benefits, not only in terms of health, but also in terms of free time with for other things, for the household, the woman in the household. So yeah, we still don't have it, but we do believe in the partnership of the private sector, the private sector, the public sector, and local civil society.
Very nice.
Anyone could talk about the challenge that you see in Brazil when you talk about the trilemma, or how to address them?
Well, good morning. My name is Natalia. I'm also from Copa Energia. Well, Luis, a key challenge that I see in the perspective of the sustainable perspective of the trilemma, when the biofuels are coming to scene, in Brazil, but also in the rest of the world, we have the land use change problem. So from my point of view, it's a very important challenge to address, and I would like to hear your opinion, and Karine as well, on that topic.
The most important thing related to biofuels is the narrative, in the end of the day. If you look at the efforts that Unica has made for the ethanol back in the early 2000s and up to 2010, was to demystify the main issue that cane was displacing the Amazon rainforest. And this narrative needs to be strengthened each year, and we need to take this to the world. Many times as Brazilian, when you go for international conferences and so on, we are afraid of telling people that they are wrong. We should not be afraid, because they are wrong. We are not deforesting in order to produce more biofuels. It's not what's happening. See where the new frontiers of the cane are taking place, or even what we are doing with soybeans to produce biodiesel. Or if you look at the projects that are being planned for the production of SAF, they are all based on degraded lands. Well, those are lands that are not being used for any purpose, economic purpose. It's in there. We are just putting economic value and also sustainability topics. We are regenerating soil. Carbon is stocked into the soil as well, and it's captured in the soil as well. So degraded lands also address the problem of climate change. And we need to take this narrative and put to the world very clearly. I see that many of the companies that are working in this direction are taking this narrative outside. However, we as Brazilians need to still always reinforce that message. Okay? It has been done for ethanol. Ethanol is already recognized. We are able to sell ethanol in California, for instance. CBIOS is in there trying to decarbonize the energy distribution. We have now biomethane coming to the scene. And all of this is using the same biomass. We are not increasing too much land to produce more biofuels. We are just being more efficient. If you take the ethanol industry, for instance, if you look at the efficiency at which we're converting ethanol back in the 70s and where we stand today, it has a huge increase when you do the liters per hectare. There is a lot of efforts being done in the agriculture. There are some efforts being done in the industrial side as well. If you look at all the initiatives related to palm oil in the north, or the Macau in the Cerrado area to produce SAF, it's always sustainable. We are looking for areas that are not being economically used in somehow, and we are not taking out the forest to do that. So this is the narrative that needs to be addressed and reinforced in each of the conferences. One thing is to say this discourse here in Brazil, where most of us are Brazilian, we understand the issues. We need to take this to the audience and take this message and strengthen that message from a governmental point of view as well as from a private sector.
I don't have much to say about biomass. I'm sorry. I only know that the trend, what I'm seeing in Europe among the industries, that it's kind of turning. At some point, biomass was like the go-to sustainable solution. It's not that much anymore. Also, because there's an increasing awareness of like, well, there's a limited resources. So if all the industry starts using biomass, the prices are going to go super high, and the unpredictability of the biomass prices makes it a not so interesting, attractive investment at the moment, at least.
Yeah, but the biomass discussion in Europe is quite interesting. If you go back to the early 2000s, biomass pellets was a major thing. Okay, so we have many efforts in Brazil trying to export biomass pellets. The southeast of US was exporting pellets to Europe. And all the companies, Vattenfall, Dong, and the others, RWE, were always trying to find biomass pellets. What happened to change this view, in my opinion, and what I have followed is, innovation took place and disruption took place. What I mean by that? Companies such as Heim that is looking towards how to use the cheap energy that is available from renewables throughout the year can be used to drive heat production in the industry. How can we use other sources of energy to feed the heat networks that are available in Europe? We're just hearing from the other panel that data centers are being used in France as source of hot water to provide heat in the networks for Paris. Actually, I was not aware the swimming pool for the Olympics was heated by a data center. It was very interesting to hear about it. So this kind of innovation and disruptions had 2 points in Europe. One, it displaced the need for you to rely on an energy source that came from the other side of the ocean, because biomass would be produced in Brazil or in the southeast of the US to provide this amount of pellets they needed. So there will be a problem in resilience in the end of the day, in security. So innovation took place and it's disrupting a little bit more the market. And they are using that to make available, to make use of the cheapest energy they have. So the problems they see in the grid, you are trying to storage this to be used when the energy is high.
Yeah, but I think the discussion on biomass is kind of the same as with hydrogen, right? It's when does it make sense to, like biomass is a no-brainer when you're in the pulp and paper industry. You just use your waste biomass and burn it for energy production. But it's always the question of like what are the energy sources you have in any given area, and what does it make sense to do with that energy? Do you want to store it, or do you want to use it locally? And I think the discussion in Germany was swearing that hydrogen was the silver bullet at some point. Well, the industry was not always didn't always agree with that position from the government, but they were all about hydrogen, and they're realizing now that it's cheaper sometimes to just store locally and use the energy locally. Hydrogen is good when you want to transport it or use it somewhere else. So maybe back to Brazil and the multiple Brazils that you mentioned. I think having this regional visions of what is there here that we can do with the energy sources available and the energy needs. And so I come from this industrial electrification perspective, but where is the Brazilian manufacturing? What kind of industries do you have, and where is it? And what's the potential to do like local grid kind of, because modernizing the grid is super expensive, and that's the major bottleneck. So I think you need to think locally in order to find the smartest solutions.
I think this is a great point for us to position that energy planning in Brazil is not a countrywide problem, but it might be a state local problem that integrates to the general framework. So you need to understand, okay, I have, for instance, São Paulo State or even the Southeast, huge loads. There are some nuances throughout the day, many industrial sites. What are the available energy sources that I have? We have natural gas coming from the pre-salt. We have refineries that could supply transportation fuels. We have sugarcane that could produce energy and ethanol, and we have other sources. Do we really need to think about how to make it available to the whole country, or solve the problem piece by piece and then see an integrated solution? This is another way of planning. It's different from the approach today. The approach today is more countrywide and trying to find out the specifics, but many times the specifics are missed in the main.
I think so too.
Hi. I was thinking on what about you presented and our discussion, that this is what in design we call a wicked problem. It's not a difficult problem or a complex problem, it's a wicked problem that's even more complex. And I'd like to hear your opinion, because with all those super necessary questions, they take us to a long-term vision of energy and plan for a country that you mentioned also as well. But when we look to the private sector, we are looking on short term because private companies, they have KPIs, annual KPIs and OKRs and goals and etc. that turn into executive bonus. They turn into money that they receive every year. So that's a short-term vision, right? And when we look to the public sector, there's still a short-term vision that we call election that comes every 4 years. And many times a long-term vision does not match the short-term vision. So I'd like to hear your opinion on how we balance that. Of course, it's not a magical answer. That would be too easy. But maybe your thoughts on that.
Let me try to address that one. So if I go back one page, you have that part of the answer. There is a need for a more alignment between vertical and horizontal when it comes down to all the entities that are working together. In the end of the day, what we are missing is a vision of a long-term vision for the country, what we expect from Brazil. It's very hard for any of us to put together a view. Each one of us has one, and there is no alignment among the many sectors. I don't completely agree with you that the private sector is looking at the very short term. If you look at the energy-intensive industries, they are here, they have made investments that need to last 30 years in order to pay for the payback to happen. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. For instance, if you take the steel makers, they want to produce green steel or steel that has a lower impact or lower carbon content because they want to sell it to Europe or to the US or whatever. They want to make this movement in Brazil. But to make that, they need to see, okay, if I do this, if I invest in a grid or if I invest in hydrogen, I don't know what's the investment. I need to ensure that there will be stability for me to take this business for the next 30 years. So I see that the private sector has this long-term view. The major problem is there is a lot of insecurity on the regulation around energy in Brazil. The rules change a lot. Okay? And for instance, there is a way. And sometimes people or governors or regulators are not willing to change in the end of the day. However, they put some conditions on constraints to the problem that prevent us to find a solution. Let me take one example. CEMIG in Minas Gerais declared that they could allow distributed energy if you are able to generate during the night. There is no sun during the night. So invest in your solar panel, but there is no payback. So this is the lack of the long-term view. The way that the government and the election is taking place is the following. If energy prices go up, then you have problem on inflation. Inflation tends to lead you to a problem on elections, most of times. Okay? So this long-term view, this long-term alignment needs to go beyond governments, beyond this. So we need to have strong agencies and strong entities that are doing this policy and that are driving this agenda independent of what the government wants. And this is the hard part. For instance, in Europe, they do have that. They have this long-term view on what we need to get to, and they try to make the world adapt to that. For instance, CBANs is a great example on that particular part. They decided to install CBANs after the ETS, and now they're taking it to the world and say, look, guys, there is a carbon border adjustment mechanism here. There is a carbon tax for you to sell to Europe. Do whatever. We don't have that particular view in Brazil. I was looking at, for instance, the bill for carbon markets. There will be 3 elections before this carbon markets to be in place. I was making the calculations. I'm pretty sure that the bill that was approved last year is going to be quite different for the bill that will take place in 2030. And this is the lack of vision. Okay? So private sectors do have that vision, but they are insecure about what are the rules they have to play by. Us, we are takers in this whole scenario. We can make some efforts, but our power is to the elections and find the right policies and ensure that people are finding these problems. But what we need is independent agencies that are actually proposing a policy, ensuring that that policy will take place, independent of what happens from the political side.
If I may add something to that, I think it's a very good point that Luis made. I think the your question is the key question of humanity, long term, short term tension, and how we're going to solve that. And I do agree a lot with he said in the sense that it's very hard for the private sector to invest very long term, especially in a country like Brazil. We do not have room to make mistakes. We do not have, any space to pay for technology that is not going to be, the right technology for energy transition, for example. So if you think about the industrial sector in Brazil, let's say, the steel sector in Brazil, the key point is who's going to buy it, right? Where is the demand? So whatever green steel we produce with hydrogen, we have lots of potential for hydrogen in Brazil. Green hydrogen, but who's going to buy it? Because it's still expensive and there is only so much, steel that Europe can buy or Brazil can use. And we're competing with other countries, with China, who produces steel. So, for example, SAF, who's going to buy SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, if it's going to be 3, 4, 5 times more expensive than, the jet fuel that we use now. So, and then you go back again to the policy and regulation, because if you have a mandate and you have this as a direction, the decarbonization as a direction, then you have secured at least part of the demand until, the technology matures and proves to be, the right technology. So,
But yeah, it's excellent points, because now I actually, while we are talking here, I realize this is the context I'm living in, but I take it, I just take it for granted. But obviously in Europe, I've never doubted that was the goal. Like, decarbonization is the goal. And that what enables a company like Haim to say, like, let's go, let's take the risk of creating this company, recruiting people. We don't know. There's a lot of risk involved in being a startup. And I think if you don't have that, the corporations are not going to move. There's not going to be any startups taking risk, because there's no risk mitigation at all if you don't have the long-term vision. So, yeah, who can do that in Brazil? Any one of us here taking the lead?
Can share some good news. Come on. Well, I work for ANP, the oil, gas, and biofuels regulator, and there, for the oil and gas biggest producers in Brazil, we have the obligation to invest 1% of their gross revenue in R&D. So, in Brazil, this is most of R&D invested in energy. It's around 4 billion reais per year. And we have some programs that take risk to be innovative, and especially, it's not just for oil and gas, it's for energy. So we have a lot of projects in hydrogen and CCS and sustainable development, circular economy, things like that. And we have an open innovation program where we joined the biggest producers with 31 million reais. And we brought 21 startups to solve some of the challenges that are common in the energy sector. And we have an educational program, which is 25 years. And we have 60 programs around Brazil, not just Southeast. And we have scholarships from graduation to post-graduation. And they are trying to solve some of those challenges in the energy sector, not just oil and gas. So those are good news.
Yeah, that's good.
And companies that do not have any obligation to invest, they can also put money, COPA, in those structural programs for educational scholarships for energy, and also in the open innovation program. So you're welcome.
And are the companies that you're working with in committing to maybe invest or buy a pilot, a demonstrator? How much are they committed to following new?
Well, for the Open Innovation Program is the first edition. We're just finalizing the contract with these 21 startups. And we are very positive, thinking that at the end they are going to be fighting to contract those startups. So those startups, they have the biggest clients already looking for them. They are the mentors. They are going to open their data, their infrastructure to the POCs, the POC of them, of those startups. And well, we have hope that they will put our technical readiness level of our R&D portfolio even higher, and we're gonna meet the goal of really produce new technology, services, business in Brazil for Brazilians and for the world actually too. So we have hope. But the scholarships, if you talk around here, I'm sure that you're gonna meet some people that hold and had those scholarships to work in the energy sector, in the energy industry in Brazil. So we have several leaders in those companies that already had this scholarship to be more specialized in the needs of our industry here.
No, I can contribute to that in the testimony regarding that. In 2006, if I'm not mistaken, I had a student on PN 42, PN 42, if I'm not mistaken. It was one of the first investments that the ANP was using to address scholarships to students in public universities. And if I look at the type of work you were doing back then and what type of work we are doing today, I can see there are more integration from the private sector into those research than we used to have in the days. When I was taking my studies, much of the things that we were looking at, the problems we are trying to solve in the academia were from our side. I mean, we were deciding which problems to solve. We had very little discussions with the private sector other than Petrobras. Petrobras was always present in many of the discussions, and I remember seeing so many vibration-induced vortex in geysers and so on back in the days that I said, okay, Petrobras is trying to do something in the pre-salt. This was the so what back then. But at my end, I was looking at renewables back then, and I was figuring out what kind of problems renewables going to have. When I look today and I saw the awards yesterday that Lavinia was presenting as well, we see that the private sector is putting the questions to the universities and bringing in money through the programs that we have and trying to address. The challenge that I have for NEP is, are we solving the right problems when we look for the energy systems, or we are solving specific problems for that particular company? This is quite key for to ask ourselves. Say, look, okay, I have this amount of money, and they want to have a solution that will be addressing that particular platform offshore. Should we invest that, or should we think about how to decarbonize the whole production offshore, so on and so forth? So I think that this kind of choosing among the different projects is important. It's not only about the money, but solving the right problem as well. This is the challenge I would put to you.
Yeah, we are public policy executors, but actually we have the public policy makers, the Energy Council. They put the prioritization on 11 subjects, and all of those are related to energy transition and to digital transformation. So we are trying to review our regulation to push those obligated companies to invest much more. We are growing up with we were less than 10% of our portfolio were in energy transition and environmental protection, and now we're almost 30%, and we're gonna try to push even more because now we have the public policies requesting us to do that. I will go there and open to listen. Okay, bring your challenge.
A silent audience is very hard always, because either we are very clear on the message, or we are very unclear that nobody wants to drive any questions because it doesn't matter, right? So guys, I think that the framework for the Trilemma is quite interesting. It's something that addresses and allows us to see the perspective on energy from a broader way. We have 4 minutes more. If no more questions, I would like to thank you all for attending the session. Thank you.
Please
Oh,
go.
No, just one thing that I've trying to do also in our portfolio. I don't know if you have any experience on that. We are trying to bring more transparency, and one of those indicators that we're trying to make the projects bring are the how the results of those projects impacting the SDGs in Brazil. So we're trying to make those alignments and hope if you have any experience of things doing that, do you have SDGs as indicators in your projects? I think it would be nice to know. Do you have that, or Copa Investments? Do you align with SDGs?
yes.
Because you're
In
trying
Copa-
to do that.
Yeah, in COP we have the targets, and when we look at the prioritization matrix that we have for the strategic projects, the SEG aspects is part of the framework. It's not only about being economically viable, but it's in a broader context that, okay, what kind of environmental consequences a project has? Are we adding something to the social part? As Lavinia was mentioning, LPG is a very social fuel. So we have impact. So whatever we are trying to do, how the society will face this. And think about governance as well. We are always looking at to give transparency within our own projects on where the money is going, how the money is flowing, and why we are doing stuff, and trying to relate this to the market. In the specifics for your projects, I would not try to embrace the world all of a sudden. So what are the key SDGs that are important for us to resolve the problems for Brazil and make the ones that are proposing the projects to connect that? If you put this burden on you, it's up to you to understand what the project will bring. Maybe you ask whoever is bringing the project. What we do here is once someone proposes a project within COPA, we ask, what do you expect from that? I think this is a key question, and then you can add this new element to the discussion. Okay, so I'm going back to the thank you part. Thank you all for attending the masterclass. It was my first time presenting a masterclass and in a MIT conference. Maybe you are already lecturers for MIT. I could put this in the resume. I don't know. It could be a good one. But again, Copa is building a portfolio to drive the energy trilemma in Brazil and address the different perspectives. We are very happy to be not only the largest LPG distributor in Brazil, but as well energy platform and energy go-to place for clients to find out solutions for their problems. And we are pretty open to take discussions outside and so on. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Corinne.
Thank you, Luis. Thank you all.